We are back. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowsky, and as always, the yang to my yin, Susan Hobson. Susan, how are you?
I am excellent. I'm fired up about this interview. So let's go. Let's get this party started, shall we?
Let's get this party started. And as always, we have to start off with a quote. And so I have one here from Pliny the Elder, who is a Roman author and natural philosopher. And he says, "The depth of darkness to which you can descend and still live is an exact measure of the height to which you can aspire to reach."
Tell us why you picked that one, sir.
I picked that one because, we've talked a lot about purpose in 2023, and a lot of what we do here is turning pain into purpose. And so I wanted to start off with a little bit of that, as the pain can help you reach new heights.
And have you ever heard the pain into power into purpose before? I heard that one this week, and I had to bring it here to this show because I know we're going to be talking a little bit about that power piece, but I especially can't wait to talk about it as it pertains to purpose, because turns out the two are totally correlated, right?
Absolutely. And that's, obviously an intro to our special guest this week, someone who's well known for speaking about power and writing books about power. We have Ron Carucci with us. He's the managing partner at Navalent. He contributes to Harvard Business Reviews. He's a TEDx speaker, and he's the author of To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. Ron, how are you?
Rob, Susan, how are you both? Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And Ron, obviously we have your quick bio, but we'd love to hear a little bit about you. What was your journey in arriving to where you are today?
Gosh, are we doing a 5-episode series?
Let's do the mini series, Ron.
Yeah, that I can get a Golden Globe for,
Yeah, exactly.
Best podcast guest in a mini series. I won't do all 40 years of that history, but suffice to say that organizing human endeavor, bringing people together to work, at scale more than they can do on their own, has always been a fascination to me. So I spent a bunch of years inside big companies working to help them become more effective as an organizational psychologist. And then I learned the hard way that sometimes when people ask you to help them get better, that's not actually what they really want. They just want you to tell them that they're doing fine. So, and younger in my career, didn't always have the diplomacy or the political savvy to read that right. I just assumed I was there to be helpful, which meant starting with telling the truth about where things were. So I began to collect up a great collection of severance packages. And in between my corporate gigs, I would do these great consulting gigs. And I quickly figured out that the same behavior that got me into some murky waters inside companies got me paid really well outside companies. So after a while, I realized I should take the hint here. I'm going to live out my passion for organizations. It's probably going to have to be by not being part of one. And so I went to work for a wonderful consulting firm in New York City for 8 years or so, and really learned a ton there, met some great friends. And when that got sold to a bigger giant, it stopped being fun. And a few of my friends thought, we can still do this on our own. We love this work. We're passionate about what it means to help leaders and organizations transform. We can go do this on our own. And so 18 years ago, we started our firm Navalent, and have been at it ever since.
And what mission are you on at Navalent? Let our audience connect with that.
So we are powering the transformational journeys of others. When leaders are faced with either of their own making, a disaster or an opportunity they didn't see coming, and some type of transformative change, whether it's their own or that of the people around them or the entire enterprise, or all three, is needed to reach that aspiration or get out of that ditch. We construct those journeys. We actually create a very holistic and not easy path for them to reach where they want to aspire to reach. And after 18 years and hundreds of organizations and scores of CEOs and executives we've accompanied, we now have a reputation for being one of the the premier places you go to when you really want change to stick.
I want to go there before we get into power. How do we make change truly stick?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it starts by understanding, what you're playing with fire, right? What is it that needs to actually be done? Most leaders will point to a symptom of pain. We're losing customers, or margins are eroding, or my team isn't engaged, or some other. Just fix the pain and give me a shot, and or give me my diversity flu shot and make everybody happy and be done. But we all know that that's not really how change happens. Our code language for transformation is within, between, among. Change has to, for transformation to stick, it has to happen deep within a leader, in their biases, in their own sense of self, and their imposter syndrome, and their arrogance, and their narcissism. It has to happen between them and adjacent spaces. So we've all seen the border wars: sales, marketing, supply chain operations, me and the guy next to me who wants your job. And it has to happen systemically. It has to happen culturally, strategically, structurally. And the reality is, whenever we get called into a place where change has gone afoul, we can always diagnose which one of those went wrong. And the sad reality is, you could do one or two of them brilliantly, but all three are required for transformation to stick. That's what we all know. You can take an alcoholic out of a family, send them to rehab for 6 months, turn them into an amazing human being free of addiction, put them back in that same family, and they're going to regress because the system itself around them and the relationships around them didn't change. So, we understand that we're going to screen for within, between, and among on every journey we take. You may have between pain or among pain, but eventually you have to do all three if you really want change to stick. And most of today's marketplace doesn't buy that way. They buy a within coach, they buy a between team builder, they buy an among culture changer or strategist. And those pieces are piecemealed. And so they'll work on that one lever because it's their favorite lever, or the one they're comfortable with, and leave the others out and hope for the best. But then, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months into the work, things begin to regress back, and they can't figure out why.
Where does a leader need to begin if they recognize that they have to go on this type of transformational journey in their organizations?
With themselves. It's, you cannot impose change on others if you're not willing to undergo it yourself. There's no challenge you're facing, whether it's opportunistic or painful, for which you aren't part of the problem. If it's opportunistic, you would have already seized that opportunity if you were already the leader that could get you there. If there's pain in a situation, you had to contribute to it in some way. And many leaders either over-index on "it's all my fault," or they under-index on I didn't do this, it's them. And so, part of our diagnostic processes are fairly comprehensive. We extract data from people that they never knew they could offer. And we amalgamate that data into a really comprehensive story. So you get back every word we hear. We put all the voices back in the room you sent out. And so you get 30 or 40 or 50 pages of the story that's being told about yourselves, that you're telling yourselves, that you're not telling each other. And now you got it in black and white. So now you're forced to confront the cognitive dissonance in the room, the competing agendas, the different viewpoints, the places where you're wildly aligned and didn't know it. You're in violent agreement and never had that conversation. So we begin by ripping off all the scabs and making people have honest conversations about the stuff that they really worked hard to avoid.
That's where they start, right? Stepping into their power.
Well, or realizing where they've abandoned it, right? I mean, I think that's the greatest abuse of power, at least from our research, is not the hoarding of it for self-interest or self-promotion or, vile uses. We've seen those in the newspaper, but the reality is the greatest abuse of power was the abandonment of it. People getting too uncomfortable wielding it for even a greater good. And so they put it down in favor of counterfeits, buying popularity, being Santa Claus and being a benevolent dictator and making everybody feel good, being very patriarchal and paternalistic about how they lead. And buying popularity and loyalty rather than respect and commitment.
I want to go deeper there, Ron. Like, is that folks who are just passing all accountability down the chain, or what does that look like in practice?
Well, they would say, I'm being empowering. They would say, I want people to feel included and feel part of a team. So they would have a benevolent spin on it. But what it really does is wreak havoc, because they say yes to everything, which means that you've now diluted the focus of everybody. They are so committed to not disappointing people or making people unhappy that they tell people So I had one client who had been nicknamed the Waffle.
The Waffle.
Everybody knew how to play the last one in game, and so people would literally work to get on his calendar. Like they'd go to his admin and get that 10-minute slot right before the executive team meeting, so they knew they would be the last one in, so that they'd get their way, and that whatever happened was going to go their way. He thought he was a great leader, and he was a very nice man, but so many executives don't realize that they're candidates for the next vacancy on the spine donor list, and confuse strong leadership with just creepy benevolence and ruinous empathy, and kindness with caretaking.
So what does strong leadership look like? Let's help to create a model for our folks to really plug into.
Here's the cold reality. Great leadership is the ability to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb.
Woo! I've never heard that before. I love that.
You have to be willing to say no. People want their focus narrow. They want to know their efforts are mattering towards something. And if you are changing your mind every day, or you're the new shiny sexy object chaser, or you're the one that's afraid to disappoint someone because they're not going to get their way, conflict is the raw material of innovation. Without those sparks, no good ideas are going to happen. And if we all think the same, we all can't be necessary. But so many leaders are just, and in today's highly politicized and polarized environment, that dissonance is literally terrifying for them. Like literally, for many CEOs of public companies, they believe, I'm not sure that it's true, but they believe their shareholders and their stock prices rise and fall on those differences, or on the arguments, or on the perceived scandalous things. And so they're so scandal avoidant and headline avoidant that they're not leading. They're just, trying to keep the illusion of whatever up. And that's just a recipe for disaster, because at some point it's not going to hold up. You'll get tested by some crisis. And at that point, the curtain falls and people go, oh, that's what's going on back there. Ugh.
So how do we start to turn the lights of self-awareness on for folks, right? Because, obviously Dr. Urich, her research says, around 12 to 15% are actually self-aware when 95% of people think they are. So those roughly 80% of folks that aren't self-aware and could be falling into these passive leadership strategies, how do we start to unlock that for them?
Well, certainly feedback of some kind, of some loop. It's astounding to me how many leaders can go years uncalibrated without, it's like not checking the oil in your car for 5 years and then wondering why it blew up. Here, it's a very simple litmus test. Ask yourself, is there somebody coming into your office at least once or twice a week telling you something that makes you uncomfortable? If the answer is no, it's very simple. Your leadership sucks, because they're telling somebody. And if they're not telling you, you have to wonder why. And if your conclusion is they're not coming in because there isn't anything wrong to tell me about, now you're done. Because if you have a team of even 6 people, something during any given week is going to go amiss. Not that you're always needed to help fix it, but if you're unaware of it, then you're out of the loop. Every night at the dinner tables of people you lead, people are telling stories about you. Absolutely true. You just have to understand, you have to decide, do you want to know what those stories are? Or do you want to control that narrative in some way? So at least be sure that the stories they're telling them, their families about you, make them want to come back to work the next day. And if you're out of that loop and just assuming there's a story in your head that says everything's great, you should be really scared. If you don't have some mechanism where your organization is telling you their experience of you, there's a million of ways to do that, right? Employee engagement surveys are okay, but that's just, they always get homogenized into some very mushy data. But feedback about you, and you should be soliciting it. And your goal should be to get to the place where some anonymous mechanism isn't needed for them to come and tell you when you misstepped, or when you said something stupid, or when you did something that was offensive. You just assume that every day you're going to do something that you didn't intend to be taken a certain way. And I'm not talking about the hypersensitive, weak-skinned, I said a word the wrong way and it offended you. I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about legitimate concerns, not coddling stuff. And you should want to know what those are. And here's the irony is, your weaknesses, your humanity is one of your greatest sources of credibility if you're the one talking about it. If you're the only one not talking about it, now it's a major liability.
Wow. Yeah, I think the way we try to position this in our leaders' mindsets is to see it as the feedback itself, right? As valuable growth intel, right? Like those are opportunities for your growth. You can't get to the intelligence unless you first go through the awareness. But I know a lot of leaders really struggle if they've never really adopted this type of strong leadership behavior, struggle to know even how to start that type of dialogue with their people. So what are some tips that we can give these leaders who have identified that this is a gap, have identified that this is actually a gap that represents an opportunity for growth? Yeah, how can they start to have those conversations with their people?
Well, I think an honest, authentic, vulnerable opening that says, hey, I know I'm not perfect. There's got to be ways I can grow. I'd like your thoughts on how I can be a better leader to you. And so here's how that's going to happen. And just let people know, and then close the loop. Here's what I heard from you. Here's what I learned. Wasn't all comfortable to hear, but it's good to know. Here's my commitments to you. Here's what I'm going to work on. And I'd like to hear from you along the way when I'm making progress or when I'm falling short. Just be upfront about it. And most teams, more and more often than not, people will get behind you and they'll want to be your ally and want to make you. Now, if they don't believe you, or you've done it multiple times before, but nothing ever changed, then assume people are just going to roll their eyes and, look the other way and tell you what you want to hear. But you have to ask yourself why you've had to go back more than once to do this. Is there something else going on that's clearly this is not, maybe leadership isn't for you.
Wow. Wake up call. Right?
Well, if you've got multiple sources of feedback that keep saying the same thing over and over again, and you believe somehow it's changing, but it's clearly not changing, or you're not, or maybe it is changing and you aren't helping people see that. You're part of helping. When you're a leader, you get the cruel call of helping manage your own change and other people's. When a team tells you they want you to be more empowering, they're not saying to you, I want to make more decisions. But that's the outcome. So when you become more empowering and they suddenly go, I didn't bargain for that. Wait, I don't want to make decisions. So they're bargaining for your change. They're not bargaining for their own. You as a leader have to anticipate the fact that any change you make in you will require a change in them. And if you're not helping them get ready for that, suddenly you're going to realize, we liked it better when you were a micromanager and you were doing all the work. And they're pushing back on the very things they asked you for, and suddenly you're confused. So, your job is the cruel call of having to manage both of those transformations, not just your own.
So how do we do that? Like even our own internal change can be incredibly hard to do. How do we also do or help our folks change as while we're changing and manage that whole cycle?
Well, first of all, you have to make it normal. You have to make, talking about your own growth and development a routine part of your work. It can't be this once a year, give me my development flu shot and we're done. that takes time to normalize the fact that we are each invested in one another's growth, which means we talk about it. We talk about where we're doing well, and we talk to each other and me about where we're falling short. So I had one leader, do a hot seat every week on her team where somebody was on the hot seat and everybody went around and told that person, here's something you're doing really well. Here's something I wish you'd do differently. And it became a routine part of how they as leaders, had eyes on each other. And it was an agreement that, if you saw me in a meeting or in a town hall or someplace where I was stepping in it and I didn't know it, you're going to tell me because you care. And so you have to normalize the conversation and normalize the process of holding each other's development very caringly and with intention.
I gotta say, since we have you in studio as the expert on power, this obviously is some of what we're coaching out here, right? Is like really helping us understand that stepping into our power starts with stepping into that responsibility ourselves, right? And I think just looking at the good things and not looking at the opportunities for growth, obviously there's a little bit of an imbalance in your power there, but let's help our audience plug into how you think about this whole power concept where it pertains to leadership. What does it mean to you?
Well, so we did for our book, Rising to Power, we did a 10-year longitudinal study of 2,700 leaders to understand, what we've known for 25 years is that leaders that rise up in organizations, as they take on broader roles of power, they tend to more than half of them fail within the first 18 months,
wow.
which we've known for 20 years. And the recruiters love it because it's an annuity for them. But the damage we're doing to families and opportunities and careers is just unconscionable. And we did the research based on what started to happen to our clients. We watched really promising leaders start to, inexplicably flame out, and which was just, undoing to us. So we went to investigate what was happening. And that led us to say, wait, this is more systemic than this. It's not unusual. This happened to everybody. And so, we got to fix this. This can't be, how could this be acceptable? And so we wanted to uncover every possible landmine leaders were stepping into on their rise to power. How could you go from being a high potential, best in the world as a senior director, and suddenly now you're a vice president and you're a disaster? I mean, there's lots of ways it can happen, but normally people's judgment on potential isn't that bad.
Yeah, right.
And so, but what people don't appreciate is how different the conditions are at higher altitudes when the air really is thinner, and the dynamics are just different, and the work is different. And so, the very things you did to be successful in the middle are the very things that will make you unsuccessful at the top. Power is one of those things that stewarding it well is not something we all do readily. We have power in the information we now have. We have power in the set of relationships we share. We have power in the authority that comes with our position. And each of those sources of power has the opportunity to do great good or great harm. And I don't mean a nefarious, now I can be a misogynistic, greedy, on the take. Those people are their own category. I'm just talking about not being aware of what harm could be done. And even with the best of my intentions, mishandling information or mishandling a relationship or not opening a door for somebody when I should have created access for them, not giving people access to information they should have now that I didn't realize they didn't have, but I now do. Not realizing that the power differential in the room positionally makes a difference for what people now tell me. Because when I was their peer, they told me everything. Now suddenly I'm the boss, they tell me nothing. Yep, that's how it works.
Literally.
Your life is you're now on the Jumbotron 24/7. You're your own news cycle. You have a bullhorn strapped to your mouth 24/7. Everything you say is amplified. You will be misquoted by the hour. And there'll be 20 versions of you concocted across the organization you lead. And many leaders are just not ready for the reality of what it means to lead it at higher levels. That power is exclusively there for you to serve a greater good. It's to serve the organization and serve the people you're leading. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't enjoy the benefits or the perks that come with the role you have. But what people look at those jobs and they think, oh, they're so privileged and they get all this money. Those are the most ruthlessly unforgiving jobs in the organization. And most people don't want that side of the job that you probably don't ever see. But you're a public dartboard. And with that comes a requirement of grace and self-efficacy and compassion and a lot of things that were never required of you in the middle. And so stewarding that power and figuring out where you want to aim it to serve a greater good is not often a question you ask yourself when you've been handed this mandate to fix a department or grow a product line or whatever mandate you've been given. You're not usually at that point in your career able to see all the subtext underneath it.
So how does one prepare for that type of ascension if they're, out in our audience, maybe a little bit younger, but certainly have aspirations to go on that journey? How would one prepare upstream?
So part of the answer is what you said. It's upstream. Mm-hmm. Waiting for your first vice president role to start preparing it. Probably. Well, what most we heard from our study samples is that like 59% of them said that they were not prepared. Mm-hmm. And 70-80% of them said their organizations did a terrible job preparing them for that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the great things we were able to do in the data was not just understanding what caused half or more of them to fail on the way up. We were able to really flip the data and understand what were the other half doing. If half of them were sticking the landing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Were there some special genetic material that we all don't have? Or we found 4 capabilities that were consistent across that population that they did to stick the landing at a high altitude. So one was breadth, meaning they could see the organization as a holistic whole. If they grew up in a function, like if you grew up in finance, you see the world through dollars. If you grew up in marketing, you see the world through brands. No longer is that helpful. Right, you have to see the world through capabilities. Right, so innovation is now the sum total of R&D, analytics, of marketing, and supply chain. Or customer service is now the intersection of these functions, and you now can see the seams of the organization, and you can stitch them. You can coalesce wholes from parts, and you can be curious enough to know how to do that. You can cross those boundaries seamlessly. Context. They could read the tea leaves. They understood why things are a certain way in your competitive set, why things are a certain way in your industry, why your culture behaves a certain way. They could be curious enough to understand why is this the way it is, rather than just slapping on premature answers.
Right.
We've all seen the new person from outside who came in with he's going to turn around this department, and they start slapping on their,
mandates.
When I was at PepsiCo, this is how we did it. Because we told them in the interview. We told them, wow, look at these great products you built. That's what we need. And you've given them permission to come in and and then when the organization starts to resist, they slap harder, and then their diagnosis becomes an indictment. You didn't tell me it was this bad. How have you people made any money? 18 months later, they weren't a good fit. Yeah, movie 100 times. So context, they can read the room. Choice, they can make hard decisions. They can say no. They can narrow the focus of the organization, and their decision-making apparatus is transparent. I can predict what data, what voices, what intuition, what experiences you're going to combine to make your choices, and I know where I fit into that equation. And lastly, it was connection, was the kind of relationships you build with people below you, around you as peers, and above you as bosses. And the clear priority for the folks in this sample who were successful, they didn't prioritize those relationships based on what they needed. They prioritized those relationships based on who they could help. So their stakeholders were prioritized around who can I make more successful, not who's going to make me look better. So the hard part about the data was that you had to do all 4 of them well. We had the team do 99 different regression analyses to understand, are we sure? Because I didn't want to say that. But the team finally said, Ron, stop. It's not going to change. The order might change, but the cutoff for the A team to the B team is all 4 of these. And so, but to your point, Susan, but the answer was they're all learnable. Mm-hmm. You can learn to do those 4 things well. You shouldn't wait to learn to do those 4 things well at the top. You should start learning at the very bottom of the vision, breadth, context, choice, and connection in every aspect of your job. So when you get there, you now understand how life really works.
So why is it that we're waiting till the age 46 to even start training our leaders? What is up with this gap that we still have here in 2023 around leadership development and training, and when that should in fact begin? I mean, they're not even teaching it in business school, Ron. What is going on here?
Absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
That we're still having this conversation. We're spending billions of dollars on programmatic leadership development, university exec development, B-school programs, coaching. Mm-hmm. And we still don't understand how to get people ready for these jobs. Mm-hmm. There are organizations out there who are being preemptive about that. They're being forethoughtful. They're identifying their high potential talent early enough to get them on pathways to move them around the enterprise and get them in broad assignments and prepare them for high level leadership. But it's rare, and it's baffling to me that, and the reason we wrote that book, Rising to Power, was because we thought this has to be solvable. This can't be some mysterious set of, weird things happening that suddenly brilliant people fall off a cliff. So we made sure that we created a blueprint that no leader who was on that ascent had to fail. That if they followed the recipe, they could be successful rising up. And the encouraging part is that, since the book came out, quite a while ago, we have scores of letters and emails and notes about how many careers we've helped save, or how many people we've helped be successful because they now are more prepared for something that they would have never seen otherwise coming.
I love that. And I love this tie back into purpose and impact, right? And you mentioned it, as we gain power, we should look to serve. And the relationships we build are to impact folks around us to become better. Like, how does that tie into what you're doing?
As a consultant, you mean?
Well, what do you want your legacy to be in all the work that you do?
I about 150 years ago, I went to a workshop. One of my dearest mentors, who she's still my mentor today, she's 83 and she still kicks my ass. It was at the time, it wasn't called Purpose. It was called Finding Your Personal Mission, or whatever it was. And she wanted me to go to this workshop. And I'm like, oh, it sounds so cheesy and sounds so silly, but okay, fine, I'll go. And this is before computers. This is before any technology. Like, remember day timers?
Yeah. The agendas.
Yeah, the little big thick books you had to carry on.
Yeah.
We still had those. And they would bring us through exercises to sort of figure out, what we were here in the world to do. And I actually landed on one, to my own surprise, and probably more in spite of me, to be a great agent of change and to make other great agents of change. And ironically, all through my Fordham years teaching, or where I taught grad school in Seattle or any other place I've taught or mentored younger practitioners, that has actually been the plumb line of my life. That is really when I make choices about how I spend my time, or what I write about, or what I research about. That really has remained the plumb line of how I see myself in the world. And so I think when I think about the 18 years body of work our firm has accumulated, and the impact in the world of hundreds of leaders and companies, we have been great agents of change, and we have in turn then unleashed others to be great and positive sources of change in the world as well.
Last question I have for this great agent of change sitting in front of us today, in terms of the current state of leadership and how much change we are knee deep in, right? Since this world pandemic first hit and the disruption occurred, I got to ask, what do you feel? What's the call for our leaders listening today in terms of what they need to prioritize here in 2023 to be those agents of change themselves in their organizations with their teams? Yeah,
I mean, if you miss the memo that the rules have all changed about leadership, then you're in trouble. But now, what used to be these really strange and unique characteristics reserved for the gods are now table stakes. If you're not compassionate, if you're not curious, if you're not courageous, if you're not empathic, in the immediate way you show up, before you're decisive, before you're strategic, before you're, innovative, you have to be those things. You have to be human first. And if you're not, if you don't lead with those things, you can be sure that you're, however innovative, strategic, or bold or decisive you are, those will be valued. The value of those will be short-lived if they're not accompanied by a new level of humanity. That 80 million people left the workplace last year and are still leaving because of the absence of.
I love this. Last question I got for you, Ron, is I know a lot of folks out there are probably listening to this, and they had that same reaction that you had when you walked into your purpose workshop. And I had it too when I walked in here with Susan the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Was this reaction of like, oh, this is cheesy, this is corny, this is stupid. Like, what does this matter? I just want to like make more money or have a higher role or that kind of thing.
Yeah, said no one ever.
That's right.
Never on the first encounter.
Well, that's not. People are not saying that, right? The world's not saying, "I just want to make more money and have a better job and go home." No one's saying that. People are saying is, "I'm bored. I'm overlooked. I don't feel appreciated and valued. This work bores me. I don't feel like I matter." People show up at work every day. Everybody, from the CEO down, looking to answer two questions: do I matter and do I belong? And our job as leaders is very simple, not easy, but simple, to make sure no one ever doubts that the answer to those questions is yes. Because when people suspect that the answer might not be yes, they go about the counterfeits, looking like I matter and looking like I belong. And they perform their belonging and they elbow their way into mattering. And we all know how ugly that is. So if you have not answered for yourself, do I matter and how? And do I belong and why? You sure as crap aren't prepared to help anybody else answer those questions. And so you have to know for yourself, why do I matter? And what does it matter to me that I matter? And how do I want to belong? And what parts of me am I hiding to sort of manipulate my belonging? Or am I showing up as all of who I am and belonging because of that's who I am? Not because I've given you a certain version of me to engineer your acceptance or your welcoming.
Ooh, I love this. Folks, rewind the tape 30 seconds and listen to that again. Ron, this was incredible to have you on. I really appreciate and love your expertise and wisdom, and we'll totally, hopefully, get you back later on in the year to talk more. But for folks out there, if you want to hear more from Ron, you can check out his book. Well, his books. He's got the one he was talking about, Rising to Power, a new book coming out called To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. You can also check out Navalent.com. We've dropped that in the podcast notes, and we've also dropped Ron's LinkedIn in the podcast notes as well, so you can connect with him there. Ron, is there anywhere else you'd like folks to find you?
So if they want to, the newest book, To Be Honest, came with a TV series. So we, all the heroes in that book, we created a news magazine show about. And so if you want to go to tobehonest.net, you'll find, an assessment tool called How Honest Is My Team? So you can see how honest your team's being with you. There's a free webinar on there, videos of the book. There's all 15 episodes of the TV series Moments of Truth, which is like my own little personal version of Dateline. You can meet all the heroes that I met and hear all the amazing stories that didn't make it in the book.
That's amazing. So definitely check that out. We'll throw that in the podcast notes as well. For us, for everyone listening, I hope you really enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed this episode. And please hit subscribe to Leadership Launchpad Project wherever you're listening, and drop us a rating and review as well. And for some leadership development, sorry, Winston just walked in.
Hi, Winston. Daddy's almost done.
He's my purpose and meaning. Leadership development coaching and more, head on over to elitehighperformance.com. Susan, is there anything you want to leave folks with today?
Rewind the game tape, folks. You heard it here. I know ever since we started this show, we've been saying our mission is to change the way the game is being played forever through heart-centric, human-centric leadership. But Ron, the very agent of change himself and all his wisdom, said that was the call. for leaders this year in 2023. If you didn't get the memo, he said, the table stakes have changed, right? So it's no longer trying to change the game. The game has changed. And I love the reinforcement around that message because I totally concur. If you are not going on this mission currently, what the heck is going on in your self-awareness? It's everywhere we're hearing about this, but I'm so glad that we were able to hear about this today at the start of 2023, because I think that is really where the power for us as a collective begins, is in owning our responsibility as leaders to learn about this stuff upstream.
I love it. And for me, where I want to echo is the self-work. And we've had Dr. Richard Schwartz on the show. We talked to David Irvine, and all of them are talking about how we need to excavate who we truly are to show up in these ways that allow you to have empathy, compassion, connectedness, and curiosity. All these 8 C's and 5 P's from the IFS model of true self. And that's where I want folks to start, because as Ron said, we get there and then we can develop the skills that will make us successful, impactful leaders. So let's start there. Ron, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, folks. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to hearing about your good works in the world as well.
Absolutely. Susan, thank you so much. Everyone who's listening, thank you so much. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
You got to see. Yeah, you got